Hello, my name is Yosoni Trujillo, and I'm from the Valley, Texas, and I'm presenting this court case of the Armenian genocide. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, stated by Martin Luther King Jr. Join us May 2nd. History is the version of past events that people have decided to agree upon. Napoleon Bonaparte. We're not makers of history, we're made by history. Martin Luther King Jr. You'll witness history in the making, the trial that never happened, the trial that they said could never happen, the trial that will happen Monday, 2nd of May, 2022. March 15, 1921, Berlin, Germany, at 10:45 a.m., a murder takes place. Talaat Pasha is the victim, and Soghomon Tehlirian is the shooter. I've killed a man, but I'm not a murderer. Soghomon Tehlirian assassinated Talaat Pasha on March 15, 1921. Operation Nemesis was a cover operation by the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, carried out from 1920 to 1922, during which a number of former Ottoman political and military figures were assassinated for their role in the Armenian genocide. After killing Talaat Pasha, Tehlirian was arrested, but on June 3rd, 1921, he was freed from the courtroom. Presiding justice said, "Why don't you consider yourself guilty?" The defendant stated, "I do not consider myself guilty because my conscience is clear." "Why is your conscience clear?" The defendant said, "I've killed a man, but I'm not a murderer." Instead of killing Talaat Pasha, how about a trial? Instead of murder, let's charge him for genocide, charge him for crimes against humanity, charge him for war crimes. In this process, we'll use the International Criminal Court, the 1948 term of genocide, and we will use an expert in this field as a judge. We will present both sides of the case, ICC prosecution, the value, and defense versus Turkey. 100 years of denial, when will it come to an end? Why was a trial necessary? The murder of 1.5 million people. The event of trial of Talaat's murder proves our point. He was tried for murder but was exonerated by the German court. His trial became a highly sensational event, examining not only Tehlirian's guilt but also that of Talaat Pasha's for their Armenian deportations and mass killings. The trial influenced Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, who was later to coin the term genocide. We reflected on the trial. Why is a man punished when he kills another man? And why is the killing of a million a lesser crime than the killing of a single individual? The Allies sell out the genocide for mandates and oil. The secret annex to the treaty called Declaration of Amnesty granted immunity to the perpetrators of any crimes committed between 1914 and 1922, notably the Armenian genocide, which were illegal under international law. The treaty thus put an end to the effort to prosecute Ottoman war criminals and codified impunity for the genocide. Historian Hans Lucas Kircher states that the treaty tactfully endorsed comprehensive policies of expulsion and exterminations of ethnic and hetero-religious groups. Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, final treaty concluding World War I. It was signed by representatives of Turkey, on one side by Great Britain, France, Italy, Japan, Greece, Romania, and the kings of Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, and on the other, the treaty was signed at Lausanne, Switzerland on July 24, 1923, after a 7-month conference. So this is why our trial takes place before the death and the treaty. March 15, 1921, July 24, 1923. Reasons for prosecution. There are at least 17 official orders signed by Mehmet Talaat Pasha, Minister of the Interior, that directly tie Talaat Pasha to the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity concerning his role in the determination of the Armenian population, March 1915 to January 1916. Article 6, Genocide. For the purpose of this court, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Article 8, War Crimes. The court shall have jurisdiction in respect of war crimes, in particular when committed as part of a plan or policy or as part of large-scale commissions of such crimes. September 16, 1915, to the Prefecture of Aleppo. You have already been advised that the government, by order of Dejmet, has decided to destroy completely all the indicated persons, Armenians, living in Turkey. All who oppose this decision and command cannot remain on the official staff of the empire. Their existence must come to an end, however tragic the means may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex or constitutional scruples. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. This is Telegram 537 and Telegram 691. Government of Aleppo, December 9, 1915. There's nothing wrong in accepting the telegrams sent to government offices by the Armenians, complaining and protesting against the deeds done to them. But it would be a waste of time to examine them. Tell those who protested to claim their lost rights when they reach their place of exile. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Prosecution, Del Valley High School. Teacher Michael Cunningham. Students, Sophia Rodriguez and Brianna Marshall. Why is May 2nd, 2022 so important? It has never happened before. Someone was responsible for the deaths. The question is who?
Chief Justice, Associate Justice Bishop, may it please the court, your honors. I will talk about genocide and war crimes. My partner will discuss crimes against humanity. We will begin looking at the charges and then go into the evidence. For the purpose of this court, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, killing members of the group, causing seriously bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intent to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Article 8, War Crimes. The court shall have jurisdiction in respect of war crimes, in particular when committed as a part of a plan or policy or as part of a large-scale commissions of such crimes. For the purpose of this court, war crimes means grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of 12 August 1949, namely any of the following acts against persons or property protected under the provisions of the relevant Geneva Convention. Statements of the facts. There are at least 17 official orders signed by Talaat Pasha, Minister of the Interior, that directly tie Talaat Pasha to the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity concerning his role in the determination of the Armenian population March 1915 through January 1916. Your Honor, before I present copies of the evidence that Talaat Pasha ordered, the mass deportation, forced movements, and genocide of the Armenian people living in the Ottoman Empire, I would like to present these three arguments to establish the basis of this trial today. First, the defense will claim they are innocent. No, Your Honor, not because they did not do it, but because the world genocide was not even a war, let alone a crime, when they murdered 1.5 million Armenians. Second, Your Honor, the Treaty of Lausanne, signed on July 24, 1923, included a declaration on amnesty according to which Turkish nationals and reciprocally nationals of the other signatory powers of the Treaty of Lausanne who were arrested, prosecuted, or sentenced prior to November 20, 1922 benefited from amnesty. Third, in the court-martial trials in Turkey, he was sentenced to death July 5, 1919. Your Honor, as you can plainly see, Talaat Pasha was found guilty of masterminding the Armenian genocide by an international court on July 5, 1919. To the government of Aleppo, March 9, 1915. All the rights of Armenians to live and work on Turkish soils have been completely canceled. In regard to this, the government takes all responsibility on itself and has commanded that even babes in the cradle are not to be spared. March 25, 1915, to the Hamo Bey, delegate to Adana. The duty of everyone is to effect on the broadest lines possible the realization of the noble project of wiping out its existence through well-known elements who for centuries have been the barrier to empire's progress and civilization. In our dispatch dated February 18th, we announced that the Dehemiat has decided to uproot and annihilate the different forces which for centuries have been hindrance for this purpose. It is forced to resort to very bloody methods. Certainly, the contemplation of these methods horrified us, but the Diamond saw no other way of ensuring the stability of its work. September 3, 1915, the Prefecture of Aleppo. We advise that you include the women and children also in the orders which have been previously prescribed as to be applied to the males of the intended persons. Select employees of confidence for these duties. September 6, to the Prefecture of Aleppo. You have already been advised that the government, by order of the Emir, has decided to destroy completely all the indicated persons living in Turkey. All who oppose this decision command cannot remain on the official staff for the empire. Their existence must come to an end, however tragic the means may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex or to conscientious scruples. To the government of September Aleppo, September 21st, 1915. There is no need for an orphanage. It is not time to give way to the sentiment and feed the orphans, prolonging their lives. Send them away to the desert and inform us. To the government of Aleppo, September 29, 1915. We hear that some of the people and officials are marrying Armenian women. We strictly prohibit this and urgently recommend that these women shall be picked out and sent away. November 18, 1915, to the Prefecture of Aleppo. It appears from the interventions which have been recently been made by the American ambassador at Constantinople on behalf of this government that the American consuls are obtained information by some secret means. The government of Aleppo, November 23, 1915, destroyed by secret means the Armenians of the eastern provinces who pass into your hands there. Government of Aleppo, December 1st, 1915. In spite of that fact that is necessary above all to work for the extermination of the Armenian clergy, we hear that they are being sent to suspicious places like Syria and Jerusalem. Government of Aleppo, December 9, 1915. There is nothing wrong in accepting the telegrams sent to the government offices by the Armenians complaining and protesting against the deeds done to them. Government of Aleppo, December 11, 1915. We hear that the correspondents of Armenian newspapers traveling in those parts have faked some letters and photographs showing certain criminal actions which they have given to the American consuls. Government of Aleppo, December 11, 1915. We hear that the correspondents of Armenian newspapers traveling in those parts have faked some letters and photographs showing certain criminal actions which they have given to the American consuls. So the government of Aleppo, December 17, 1915, to communicate those who wish to save themselves from the government deportation by becoming Muslims that they must become Muslims in their place of exile. So the government of Aleppo, December 26, 1915, it has been decided that all Armenians worked on the railway or on any construction shall be sent to their place of deportation. The War Office has given notice of this to the commanders of deportation camps. December 29, 1915, to the Prefecture of Aleppo. We inform that the foreign officers are finding along the road the corpses of the indicated persons and are photographing them. January 15, 1916, to the Court of Aleppo. We inform that certain orphanages which have opened also admit the children of the Armenians. To the government of Aleppo, January 16, 1916, we hear that all along which runs between Insili, Arin, and Aleppo, there are some 40 or 50,000 Armenians, mostly women and children. 1916, from the Ministry of the Interior to the government of Aleppo. Only those orphans who cannot remember the terrors to which their parents have been subjected must be collected and kept. Send the rest away with the caravans. Legal Government 1, Genocide. Argument 1. Talaat Pasha is guilty for 4 counts of genocide according to Article 6, killing members of the group, causing seriously bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group's conditions of life, calculated to bring the past about its physical destruction in whole or in part. forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Evidence. Argument 1. Talaat Pasha is guilty of the 4 counts of genocide according to Article 6, as well as the circular order of April 24, 1915 that was signed by Menem Talaat Pasha, Minister of Interior, ordering the beginning of Armenian genocide. Circular order of April 24, 1915 continued. Evidence for violation of Article 6 can be seen in this written document for Talaat Pasha. Evidence for violation of Article 6 can be seen in this written document from Talaat Pasha continued. Talaat Pasha's own words on this subject, genocide. Turkey is taking advantage of the war in order to really liquidate its internal foes, the indigenous Christians, without being thereby disrupted by the foreign intervention. What on earth do you want? The question is settled. There are no more Armenians. Talaat Pasha's own words on this subject, genocide continued. Conclusion. Petition to the court. In conclusion, I would like to continue and state that we should also look at the conversations that the Talaat Pasha had with U.S. Ambassador on Saturday, April 24th, 1915, according to Morgan II diary entry of that date. He had a dinner party on that night with Talaat Pasha. He had a conversation about the Zionist movement in Turkey. Morgan II suggests that Turkey should embrace the Zionist movement. Silence told him that he didn't want to trust the Zionists and didn't want non-Turks in the empire. Morgan II then asked about Armenians. He was also told by the Talaat that the Armenians were arrested and would be moved to the interior of the country where they could do no harm. No harm, Your Honor. We can not have this and shall not have this. There is a clear-cut case of genocide plain, and simply you should return guilty verdict on all 4 counts of genocide. Article 6. Killing members of the group, causing seriously bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring the people about its physical destruction or in whole or in part. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. If there are no further questions, I will stand down and allow my partner to speak on the second argument. Thank you, and vote to convict Talaat Pasha.
Okay. My partner talked about genocide and war crimes. I will talk about the crimes against humanity. Please cross-apply his arguments. Hello, my name is Brian Mansell. I'm from Del Valle High School, and I will be presenting this case about the Armenian genocide to you today. The Armenian genocide was carried out by the Young Turk government of the Ottoman Empire in 1915 through 16. 1.5 million Armenians were killed out of a total 2 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. A charge of crimes against humanity under the Rome Statute, Article 7, states that murder exists when you order groups of people to be killed, extermination exists when you order it to happen, enslavement exists when you order people to murder. It's not, oh, dang it, I have to restart. I don't know why the buttons weren't working on this one.
Go down to the very bottom button.
Okay. Yeah, it's working now. Okay. My partner talked about genocide and war crimes. I will talk about the crimes against humanity. Please cross-apply his arguments. Hello, my name is Brian Mansell. I'm from Del Valle High School, and I will be presenting this case about the Armenian genocide to you today. The Armenian genocide was carried out by the Young Turk government of the Ottoman Empire in 1915 through 16. 1.5 million Armenians were killed out of a total 2 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. A charge of crimes against humanity under the Rome Statute, Article 7, states that A, murder exists when you order groups of people to be killed. B, extermination exists when you order it to happen. C, enslavement exists when you order people to murder or others to be murdered yourself. D, deportation or forcible transfer of population when ordered such to happen. E, imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty and violation of fundamental rules of international law. F, torture ordered the denial of food supplies or health care. H, persecution against any identifiable group or collectively on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, or religious group. Perhaps the most damning thing here is Mehmed Talaat Pasha's own words. In his autobiography, Talaat stated, the deportation of the Armenians in some localities of the Greeks and in Syria and some of the Arabs was used inside and outside the empire as a source of attack on the Turkish government. First of all, I wish to inform the public that the rumors of deportation and assassination were exceedingly exaggerated. The Greeks and the Armenians, taking advantage of the ignorance of the American and European public of the Near Eastern situation and of the character of the Turks, used the deportation as a means for propaganda and painted it as best suited to their aim. In saying this, I do not mean to deny the facts. I desire only to eliminate the exaggerations and relate the facts as they occurred. One of the best sources of material on this subject would be Talaat Pasha's documented conversations with U.S. Ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Ambassador Morgenthau, as published in his 1918 book, Ambassador Morgenthau's Story. Suppose a few Armenians did betray you, I said. Is that a reason for destroying a whole race? Is that an excuse for making innocent women and children suffer? Those things are inevitable, he replied. This remark to me was not quite so illuminating as one which Talaat had made subsequently to a reporter of the Berliner Tageblatt, who asked him the same question. We have been reproached, he said, according to this interviewer, for making no distinction between the innocent Armenians and the guilty. But that was utterly impossible, in view of the fact that those who were innocent today might be guilty tomorrow. One reason why Talaat could not discuss this matter with me freely was because of the member of the embassy staff who did the interpreting was himself Armenian. In the early part of August, therefore, he sent a personal messenger to me, asking if I could see him alone. He said that he himself would provide the interpreter. This was the first time that Talaat had admitted that his treatment of the Armenians was a matter in which I had any concern. The interview took place 2 days afterward. It so happened that since the last time I had visited Talaat, I had shaved my beard. As soon as I came in, the burly minister began talking about his customary bantering fashion. On every one of these points, I had plenty of arguments in rebuttal. Talaat's first objection was merely an admission that the Armenians were more industrious and more able than the dull-witted and lazy Turks. Massacre as a means of destroying business competition was certainly an original conception. His general charge that the Armenians were conspiring against Turkey and that they openly sympathized with Turkey's enemies merely meant, when reduced to its original elements, that the Armenians were constantly appealing to the European powers to protect them against robbery, murder, and outrage. The Armenian problem, like most race problems, was the result of centuries of ill treatment and injustice. There could only be one solution for it, the creation of an orderly system of government in which all citizens were to be treated upon an equality, and in which all offenses were to be punished as the acts of individuals and not as of peoples. I argued it for a long time along these similar lines. It is no use for you to argue, Talaat answered. We have already disposed of 3/4 of the Armenians. There are none left in Bitlis, Van, and Erzurum. The hatred between the Turks and the Armenians is now so intense that we have got to finish with them. If we don't, they will plan their revenge. If you are not influenced by humane considerations, I replied, think of the material loss. These people are your businessmen. They control many of your industries. They are very large taxpayers. What would become of you commercially without them? We care nothing about the commercial loss, replied Talaat. We have figured all that out, and we know that it will not exceed 5 million pounds. We don't worry about that. I have asked you to come here so as to let you know that our Armenian policy is absolutely fixed and that nothing can change it. We will not have the Armenians anywhere else in Anatolia. They can live in the desert, but nowhere else. I am confident that the whole history of the human race contains no such horrible episode as this. The great massacres and persecutions of the past seem almost insignificant when compared to the sufferings of the Armenian race in 1915. This is rich and in many aspects a clever argument to blame the victim for the crime. Somehow the arrested were to blame for their own arrest and subsequent murders. Talaat then goes on to state that there was another group who sincerely believed that the general interest of the community necessitated the punishment alike of those Armenians who massacred the guiltless Mohammedans and those who helped the Armenian bandits to endanger our national life. The Turkish elements here referred to were short-sighted, fanatic, and yet sincere in their belief. The public encouraged them, and they had the general approval behind them. They were numerous and strong. As to the deportation of the Greeks and the Armenians, this charge is based more on propaganda than on real fact. These preventative measures were taken in every country during the war, but while the regrettable results were passed over in silence in the other countries, the echo of our acts was heard the world over, because everybody's eyes were upon us. Argument 3 with 4 counts of war crimes. Crime against humanity means any of the following acts when committed as a part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack. War crime means willful killing, torture, or inhuman treatment, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, unlawful deportation or transfers of unlawful confinement. Other serious violations of the laws and customs applicable in international armed conflicts within the established framework of the international law, namely any of the following acts: intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as such, or against individual civilians, not taking direct part in hostilities. Intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects, that is, objects which are not military objectives. It is asserted in the well-informed circles that the Turks for the present have abandoned their advance against Egypt. In Constantinople, anxiety regarding the possible forcing of the Dardanelles continues. It is evident that the situation for Christians is extremely precarious, even in large cities. And Mehmed Talaat Pasha, the Minister of the Interior, has stated Turkey henceforth there will be room only for the Turks. It is confirmed that the Armenians should be transferred to the indicated room as communicated in the February 13th telegram. As the situation has been evaluated by the state, the probability of rebellion and protest indicates the need to take action. The increasing probability of Armenian uprisings requires that every effective means of suppression should be applied. Had the war crime tribunals held in Constantinople been given the opportunity to uncover evidence and to document high-level testimony, this would have taken place over 100 years ago. As early as May 1915, the Allied powers formally accused the Ottoman government of crimes against humanity, a term which would be made infamous 30 years later following the Holocaust. However, following World War I, France focused its outrage on Germany and pursued rapprochement with the Turks. After the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, Russia lost all interest in bringing the Young Turks to justice. And despite the well-documented and harrowing accounts of the Armenian diplomats, including Ambassador Henry Morgenthau Sr., America did not take serious steps to punish the murderers that killed non-Americans. More than any other Allied power, Britain took the massacre of the Armenians seriously. In 1918, Britain had an occupying force of over 1 million soldiers in the Ottoman Empire, which allowed it to exert extensive pressure on the post-war government of Sultan Mehmed V. Furthermore, they developed British legal system wanted to hold individual members of the Ottoman leadership criminally responsible for war crimes. The Sultan, however, feared that if he took large-scale action to prosecute the Young Turks, it would provoke a nationalist revolution where he would be overthrown. The early war crime trials. The verdicts handed down by the tribunals found Major Tevfik Bey, commander of the Yozgat police, and the Yozgat lieutenant governor Kemal Bey guilty of organizing deportations, murder, pillage, robbery, and crimes against humanity and civilization. Tevfik was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor and Kemal to death. Kemal Bey's funeral became a rallying point for Turkish nationalists who were still not convinced Turks had done anything wrong during the war. The court's marital continued against prominent leaders, including Saad Halim Pasha, as well as those who had fled to Germany, including Talaat and Enver, who were tried and sentenced to death in absentia. The indictment of Talaat Enver read, in part, the disaster visiting the Armenians was not a local or isolated event. It was the result of a premeditated decision taken by a central body, and the immolations and excess which took place were based on oral and written orders issued by the central body. At the same time, politics began destroying the domestic tribunals. The British Army presence shrank by over 2/3, along with its authority. As dozens of the accused Turks began being released, the British gave up on the Ottoman trials and decided to take custody of 68 of the most prominent prisoners who were guilty of the most heinous crimes and transfer them to the British detention center in Malta. This left the Turkish courts martial in a toothless farce. Unfortunately, the British were slow to set up the tribunals, even after signing the Treaty of Sevres in August 1920, which included 5 articles on war crimes, including calling for Turks guilty of criminal acts to be brought before the military tribunals, and even carved out a new independent Armenian state. The British were left in a quagmire, not wanting to release the prisoners, but not having the political will to prosecute. As Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's nationalist revolt gained strength, defeating French troops in Silica, the British began cutting their losses. By 1920, War Secretary Winston Churchill was clearly weary of the entire issue. He wanted to make sure that Ataturk would not be pushed into the arms of the Soviet Union. When pressed to choose between prosecuting war criminals and prosecuting British soldiers, Churchill did not hesitate to advocate choosing the latter. The final straw came August of 1921 when Ataturk's nationalist group took a group of 29 Britons hostage and demanded that the release of all Turkish prisoners who remained in Malta jails. All 59 remaining Turks in custody were subsequently freed. Finally, as a further result, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed in July 1923 by Ataturk, containing no clauses on war crimes tribunals and no mention of an independent Armenia. British Prime Minister Lloyd George referred to the treaty as an abject, cowardly, and infamous surrender. Had the war crime tribunals held in Constantinople been given the opportunity to uncover evidence and document high-level testimony, as was stipulated by the Treaty of Sevres, it would have been significantly more difficult for a subsequent Turkish government to deny, distort, or minimize Turkish culpability for the Armenian genocide. For Britain, it was in their strategic interest to leave Constantinople. For Ataturk, nationalist fervor had led to the establishment of the Turkish Republic on the blood of murdered Armenians. For the Armenians, abandoned by the international community, justice became an elusive concept. Unlike Germany, whose Nazi-era leaders were held criminally responsible and punished, the Turkish Republic was never confronted the Armenian genocide. In the short run, the lack of adequate criminal prosecution of young Turk leaders following the Armenian genocide led to vigilante justice to preserve Armenian dignity. In the long run, it has caused decades of denial and has given a path for the successor state to avoid reparations. However, during the past 5 decades, Armenians worldwide have persevered to attain global recognition of the Armenian genocide. While the perpetrator generation of Turks may have escaped justice, what remains of this is the civil and territorial compensation for the Armenian people and the benefactors of the genocide. The 14 different crimes include 4 counts of genocide, Article 6, Section A, B, C, and E, 6 counts of crimes against humanity, Article 7, Sections A, B, C, D, E, and H, 4 counts of war crimes from Article 8, Sections A, 1, 2, 3, 5, B, and 2. The basis of decision. Conviction on these counts are based on at least 17 official orders signed by Talaat Pasha, Minister of the Interior, that directly tie Talaat Pasha to the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity concerning his role in the destruction of the Armenian population. March 1915 to January 1916, as well as his own conversations with New York Times and U.S. Ambassador Henry Morgenthau. This trial has been long overdue, and its importance is brought out in our 4th argument. The mere fact that Talaat Pasha was convicted in absentia in a war crime tribunal held in Constantinople in 1919 should only go to help prove he is guilty today. The difference between now and then is that Mehmed Talaat Pasha was able to escape judgment, then not escape its guilt. Today, make 2 come together and convict him on 14 different crimes. According to Talaat's report, over 1 million Ottoman Armenians had disappeared between 1914 and 1917, with the remaining population divided amongst those who were resident in the Constantinople and those who were natives and outsiders in the provinces. Practically all who were outsiders were remnants of those who had been removed from their native provinces in 1915 through 16. While native Armenians were those who were not deported outside of their home provinces, the data in 1917 reports would have been interpreted in a more informed manner by Talaat Pasha, who had privileged knowledge about the Armenian issue. For example, Talaat knew that all Ottoman Armenians were supposed to be counted for his official report. Apostolic, Catholic, and Protestant Armenians, as well as recent converts to Islam and children, had been taken into Muslim households or scattered in central and western provinces to be absorbed into Muslim communities. Then there was only the question of Armenians who had escaped from the Ottoman Empire, such as those who resisted Ottoman forces in Van in April 1915, as well as those who managed to flee across the Russian border during 1915 and 16. The number of people who escaped was probably around 150,000, and their ultimate survival was by no means clear. Thousands subsequently perished from privation and disease. In the final analysis, the great majority of Ottoman Armenians were deported in 1915, and the great majority of these deportees were killed off through forced marches, privations, and outright massacres, as attested and corroborated by eyewitness accounts. In 1921, Mr. Talaat, a 24-year-old Armenian, had rented an apartment in an upscale neighborhood of Berlin in order to surveil Talaat Pasha's daily routine. Talaat Pasha was the former Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire and architect of the Armenian genocide. Talaat was himself a survivor of the genocide that killed many of his family members. On the morning of March 15, 1921, Talaat got his chance. He followed Talaat Pasha from his house and shot the former Ottoman official at the base of his neck. Talaat's murder trial was a sensational event. At every chance, Talaat admitted that he had assassinated Talaat Pasha, but he never felt any guilt. In his mind, Talaat had avenged the murder of millions of Armenians. Talaat's defense lawyers argued something of a temporary insanity defense, and a 12-man jury acquitted him. Hundreds of miles away, a young linguistics student was troubled by the legal consequences of the trial. Raphael Lemkin was a Polish Jew studying linguistics at the University of Lviv. Talaat's trial affected Lemkin for a central reason. Talaat did not have a legal resource to bring Talaat Pasha to justice for the Armenian genocide. In fact, the word genocide did not even exist. Genocide describes the deliberate and systematic extermination of a national, racial, political, or cultural group. Genocides have occurred numerous times throughout history, even before the concept existed. Roman emperors fed Christians to lions. French Huguenots were killed en masse by the country's predominantly Catholic population. The Trail of Tears was a series of forced relocations of approximately 60,000 Native Americans, thousands of whom died during the journey. These examples, among countless others, directly targeted minority groups within a country. As far as other countries were concerned, these atrocities were considered internal matters. In the early 20th century, the concept of state sovereignty to protect Turkey from any ramifications from the Armenian genocide. What the Ottoman Empire did to its own people within its own borders was its own business, legally speaking. Lemkin was so moved by Talaat's trial that he decided to become a law student. He began his remarkable career as a prosecutor in Warsaw. In 1933, the same year in which Adolf Hitler attained power in Germany, Lemkin lobbied the League of Nations to recognize the crime of barbarity. He argued that certain crimes, such as murder, were illegal in virtually every country. Therefore, per his proposal, someone could be arrested and tried for that crime in any country, regardless of where the crime has occurred. He specifically highlights incidents in which ethnic or religious minorities were massacred by their own countrymen. His proposal to the League of Nations fell on deaf ears. The next chapter of Lemkin's career began when Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939. When German soldiers crossed into Poland, Lemkin fled to Lithuania, made his way to neutral Sweden, and eventually to the United States. Along the way, he encouraged family members and fellow Jews to flee with him. While many Jews heard the rising anti-Semitism in Hitler's language, large swaths of them were unconvinced that Hitler would follow through with his worst impulses. Lemkin had spent the last decade studying mass atrocities against minority groups. As a result, he was aware that Hitler posed a specific danger to the Jewish people. A few months after his arrival in the United States, Winston Churchill described Nazi war crimes in a radio address. Whole districts are being exterminated. Scores of thousands, literally scores of thousands, of executions in cold blood are being perpetrated by the German police troops, Churchill said. We are in the presence of a crime without a name. Before becoming a lawyer, Lemkin had been a linguist. He was aware of the power words had. Therefore, he endeavored to define the crime without a name. One of Lemkin's greatest legacies was his book, Axis Rule in Occupied Europe, published in 1944 by the Kendry Endowment for International Peace. The book dryly recounted laws in Nazi Germany, but it also introduced a new word to the world, genocide. Lemkin wrote, "By genocide, we mean the destruction of a nation or an ethnic group. This word, coined by the author to denote an old practice and its modern development, is made from the ancient Greek word genos, race, tribe, and the Latin side, killing. Generally speaking, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accomplished by mass killings of all members of a nation. It is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destructive of essential foundations of the life of national groups, with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Genocide is directed against the national group as an entity, and the actions involved are directed against the individuals, not in their individual capacity, but as members of the national group." Genocide combined the ancient Greek words genos and the Latin word killing. The word could be easily translated into many languages because of its root words, and it was simple to pronounce. Lemkin served with American lawyers in the Nuremberg trials after the war concluded. He was able to insert genocide in the indictments against Nazi leadership, although genocide was not considered an international crime. Lemkin also learned in Nuremberg that his brother's wife, and their children were the only members of Lemkin's house family to survive the war. 49 members of his family, including his parents, perished in the Holocaust. Lemkin found more career success with the newly created United Nations. The Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was unanimously adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Article 2 of the conviction defined genocide as any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group of conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. While genocide has not stopped since the conviction, it is now considered an international crime as a result of Lemkin's lifelong work. He spent the rest of his life lobbying countries, including the United States, to ratify the convention. Lemkin died in 1959. In conclusion, Your Honors, we would like to briefly the strategy that Talleyrand's lawyers planned in his two-part defense. First, they would have argued that Talleyrand was temporarily insane at the time of the murder. To support his claim, Talleyrand would have told the court that 2 weeks before the murder, his mother, who had been killed during the genocide, appealed to him in a vision, exhorting him to kill Talaat as an act of revenge for the atrocities committed against the Armenian people. The second part of the strategy was to put the victim on trial. To support their case, Talleyrand's lawyers were able to get support from two prominent Germans, Johannes Lepsius, who had recently published a book about the atrocities perpetrated against the Armenians by the Turks, and General Lyman von Sanders, the former leader of the German military mission in the Ottoman Empire. Testifying in Talleyrand's defense, Lepsius detailed the systematic plans for what he called the elimination of the Armenians in Armenia. Lepsius testified to Talaat's role in the massacres of the Armenians and told the court that he had physical documentary evidence to prove his allegations. Lepsius overthrew was followed by the testimony of General von Sanders, who described the callousness of German military officials who watched the massacre of Armenians but failed to intervene. During the trial, 5 messages with Talaat's signature were entered into evidence, including one in which Talaat ordered that Armenian children who were living in orphanages after the murder of their parents be killed in order to eliminate further danger from antagonistic elements. After 1 hour of deliberations, Talleyrand was acquitted. He was acquitted of murder because Talaat was under the same sentence of death for murder of the Armenians from 1915 to 1919. Overall, weigh the evidence presented in this court today. Weigh the 1.5 million souls who died. Weigh the fact that this is not a historical debate. It is a matter of fact. It is not folly, fancy, or lack of luck that brought us to this courtroom today. It is to finally get justice for the people that this history forgot. The genocide that began the 20th century and a genocide that is still waiting today to finally come to an end. You have, Your Honor, a decision to make. You can turn your back on the truth and let this genocide go on, or you can put a stop to it all right now. Thank you, and may you please finally set the history straight once and for all, with convicting Talaat Pasha on all 14 counts.